How's it going, everybody? Anthony or Deathkiller here. Hope you're having a good one. Knowing myself, I'm going to be doing some stuff in the background, so don't worry about it. But I want to talk about my opinion on Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree as someone who has played through it. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Overall, I want to give a bit of background, though, before I actually talk about my opinion on it. And I feel like that is almost a requirement when you talk about any FromSoft game. Is for some reason people are like, well, you played the game, well, have you done this challenge yet? And with that, I just want to say, if you honestly have that opinion before anyone gives their opinion on a game that is publicly available for them to play, go fuck yourself, genuinely. Anyways, past that though, just to talk about myself and my history of playing Elden Ring and just FromSoft in general, played all the FromSoft games that are available on PC, I should mention, and I have played a little bit of Demon Souls, and I've beaten all of them. I will also mention I have played through Elden Ring at Rune Level 1 as my kind of peak challenge, I will say. I know it's not that difficult to do, but it is something I have done, so, you know, yay. Might as well mention that. So I'm not exactly, I would say I am slightly above average. I'm saying slightly because honestly, if you watch my stream of playing Shadow of the Erdtree, you'll actually see I will just be honest and say I feel like I'm kind of bad at it. But comparing what I've done compared to other people, I will say that I am slightly above average, I guess. But I am probably about average as it gets when it comes to Elden Ring skill. So that's basically my background. Now to get onto my opinion of Shadow of the Erdtree. I give it a solid 6 out of 10. I'll be honest. It's a solid 6 out of 10. Maybe 7. Probably like 6.5. And I want to talk about exactly why I feel that way. Because I think a lot of it is just FromSoft missing the mark. I'll be completely honest. And I don't think they did anything with ill intention. I don't think any of it was intentionally, I wouldn't say intentionally bad. I don't think any of it was just bad design choices. What it seems to be, it's more of a cumulative of just kind of, that's not the best idea kind of thing, right? It's like, you know what? That's not the best idea, but if that was the only thing, it wouldn't be bad. And it's a cumulative of just a handful of those things that just kind of make it kind of bad. Now, there's also good with the bad. First and foremost, the most favorite weapon, and I have two really favorite weapons that came with this, and I really like it. The first one is, of course, the backhand blade. It is the main weapon I used for like the latter half of the game, latter half of Shadow of the Erdtree. And then past that, there's also the Rolana twin blades, which are just awesome and super fun to use. So yes, I have some really fun you have some really fun weapons that have been added to the game, and their movesets are super fun, and I do think they hit the mark with the weapons. I'll be completely honest. They're really fun and really good to use, but that's just the main pro. Past that, you have a lot of what I would say small cons to the game that to me kind of ruin the experience. First and foremost, the scaling. Now, the scaling in itself isn't actually a bad idea. I thought it was a good idea for them to do, but the problem is it just feels like a little rough, I think is the best way to put it. I definitely think they need to adjust the numbers because the way it feels to me, and this is just me, is if you're keeping up with it, the bosses, you still feel like you hit like a wet noodle and you still feel like you get hit with a truck, right? It's almost a requirement to keep up with it, and it's almost a requirement to keep up with these things if you're not like a super skilled player. And if you do keep up with them, all the bosses seem to kind of generally be at that similar damage level of both you dealing damage and them dealing damage to you. And that's not necessarily a good thing because if you fought like the first bosses, you'll notice that you hit basically like a wet noodle and then enemies hit you with, like a truck, like multiple trucks. And hold on one second. And they hit like trucks. Well, multiple trucks for that matter. And that's not really fun, because it leaves very little room for error and learning. But that's not the worst thing. Again, if that was the only real problem, I wouldn't mind. I'll be completely honest, because getting hit hard and doing very little damage isn't the worst thing in the world. That's quite literally just we'll get good. And that, like I said, that's not the worst thing. It's in combination, and that's not the end all be all. It's the combination of all the other things. The next thing is every boss is just a fight with the camera, right? I'm just going to be completely honest and say it. FromSoft drops the ball on 95% of the bosses because you're not even fighting the boss, you're fighting the camera. And there's only a singular boss I can think of that I actually had fun on while playing through this. And it was spoiler alert, I mean, it should be obvious here. It's spoiler. It's the scorpion slash centipede girl, right? The one that's like the homunculus of the two. And she was actually fun to fight. But the problem was you're still dealing with the camera, right? You still have this gigantic issue of fighting the camera. So not only do you hit like a wet noodle, not only do enemies hit you like a truck, but on 95% of the bosses, you're fighting the camera. Because while the enemy might not necessarily be massive, you're also having to deal with the fact that they do attacks that dance around the entire screen. So you basically barely ever have the boss in full view of your camera. It's almost like this game was designed, or the bosses were designed to be viewed from almost like a top-down point of view. Like you're meant to have the camera pulled super far away and top down, almost like you watch, like you ever see like the super high-end World of Warcraft raiders where they have their cameras all the way zoomed out. Yeah, it feels almost like you're supposed to be watching, you're supposed to be playing the game in that aspect, because you just can't see anything half the time, right? You just don't have any vision on the bosses or their attacks and stuff like that. And you have to rely on the fact that, hey, I see this one trick, this one pixel of the enemy's attack. I know what this combo is, and we're going to do it. And to talk about more, there's even bosses where, yeah, they are necessarily on screen, so you're not fighting the camera as much. But the problem is you can't tell what combo they're going to do, because, which leads to my next thing, a lot of enemies have combos that are just basically the same thing, but different timing. And there's only one tell that is, you know, that really tells you which one it is. So you just have to change your timing around for the same exact attack. And it's just not fun. Now, I don't mind an enemy having a lot of attacks and a lot of different combos, but make it so that they're varied and not just the same exact move, but slightly different timing. And I'm looking at you, every single boss in the fucking DLC. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. A lot of them are like that. They just have one attack that just has that has different timing and maybe a slightly different look to it, but it's literally just the same attack over and over again. And you just have to deal with the different timing. And the only reason you know it's a different timing is because it looks slightly different, right? Oh, the sword glowed red instead of purple this time. Oh, his sword glowed yellow instead of purple this time. Woo! I know I have to change my timing now. And that's like a lot of the bosses. Again, none of these, and to add to this, and I'm going to say this for like every single problem I have with it, almost every single issue with the DLC I have is not that bad in itself, right? Every single issue is almost like, whatever. But when you pile them on top of each other, you end up in a scenario where it's just like, yeah, it kind of just isn't good. They just missed the mark. Like everything accumulated together, it's just a big issue. And this is another example of that. It's another minor issue that you have to, that's really not that big of a deal in itself. In a vacuum, it's not a big deal. But when it's combined with other issues, it becomes it becomes just a giant pain in the ass. And to go over the next thing to talk about is also just the combo times. I'm sorry, but I am not a big fan of having to wait 5 to 10 minutes to be able to get a singular attack in, and then you have to wait another 5 to 10 minutes to get that singular attack in again. And my issue with this is it then promotes a gameplay that, in my opinion, isn't fun. And that is just using heavy weapon to cause enemy to stance break and poise break, so then you can get more attacks in. You're basically forced to dual wield great hammers. That's really what's end up happening here, is you're forced to dual wield weapons that do the most amount of poise damage and stance damage as possible. So this way you have the opportunity of breaking the boss's stance and then able to get a couple more hits in, or maybe breaking his combo because you'll sneak an attack in and hoping that it'll break his stance mid-attack. And chances are this isn't going to happen unless you're power stancing to heavy weapons, to gigantic weapons. And that's gonna be the meta going forward for the DLC. I can promise you. It's just power stancing heavy weapons while wearing no armor. It just almost seems like an inevitability. So you have this. So you have that awkward, that awkwardness where the enemies or the bosses are just attacking with super long combos, and then you only get enough time for like one attack. And if you have a super fast weapon, you might be able to squeeze a second attack in. You know what I mean? But you typically only get enough time to do one R1, maybe a second one, depending on your weapon, right? Maybe a second one, and then that's just not fun to me. On top of all of that, if you make a mistake, you basically have no chance to heal up unless you wait for one of the big openings. Because every boss has like one big opening. So you end up sitting there for you could sit there for, and not an exaggeration, like a third of the boss fight waiting for a singular opening for you to be able to go and heal up. Because if you try to heal up any other time, you're going to get punished for your heal. So you end up having to play this entire song and dance with the boss of, hey, am I going to wait for the big opening to heal up? Or do I just soak the damage, or do I just soak the hit and hope that the heal that and just time it so that I heal, but only a small amount because of the fact that I'm going to soak a hit. So, hey, I know if I get hit with this next hit, I'll only take a smaller amount, a small smidge of damage because it doesn't do as much. So I'll soak that one while I drink my flask. And it ends up doing this weird song and dance of you basically can't make a single mistake on the boss. And again, this is an issue, and it's two issues, but it's really one. This issue is, again, and I'm going to say it every single time throughout this video, is it by itself is not a big deal. As a whole, the issues are not a big deal, but when combined with all the other issues up to this point, it is annoying, it is frustrating, and it creates a sense of just not having fun, and that's on top of that. Now, I've already mentioned the scaling, but I do kind of want to touch on a little bit more, because this is something that I do feel, and it's not so much scaling, sorry, is your level, and it says to do scaling, so I do apologize for almost backtracking a bit here, but I do want to mention it, and that is your level. Your level basically makes no difference. This might sound weird or bad, but it's honestly the truth. Your level makes little to no difference. It's not until you get a bunch of the upgrades to level your character's power that you can actually notice a difference with your build. And even then, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a notice. So your main stat ends up being, and I'm not even kidding you here, your main stat on for your character is quite literally just health. That's really it. That's the only thing that matters. And even then, it's not that big of a deal because the enemies scale with you. So it's weird to have this scaling happen in a game that in a franchise. I'm not even going to say game. I'm going to say an entire franchise that is all about you having ways to circumvent the skill issue by leveling yourself up and being able to soak more hits, or leveling your weapon up to make it stronger and stuff like that. But there is none of that in this game, which kind of brings me to my point of what I'm trying to mention here is just there's no easy way out for a lot of these bosses. And again, by itself, it's not a big deal. I don't mind not having an easy way out for bosses. I don't mind that. I'll get my skill up and beat the boss, right? I don't care. I'll conquer it. But again, when you're combining a bunch of other issues on top of it, it creates an issue where it's like, it creates a scenario where you're just not having fun in the game. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that DLC isn't fun. What I'm trying to say is it's not worth $40. There's a lot of content to be had here, and it was very clear FromSoft put a lot of effort and a lot of care into it, but they quite literally tried to make it as hard as they possibly could, and I'm all for it. I'm well aware this is what FromSoft does with their DLCs. I really should mention that. I'm aware that FromSoft goes crazy with their DLCs, and I was expecting them to do this. Am I happy they did it? Honestly, no. Am I still playing it? Yes. Am I still having a good time? For the most part. But I have to give the game, the DLC, probably a 6.5 out of 10, like I said before. I think these issues as a whole just create a scenario where you're just not having fun with the bosses. And it's just, it's just weird, right? I mean, FromSoft usually hits the nail on the head with their bosses for the most part, and Elden Ring is a giant nail on the head. They didn't really need to go crazy, in my opinion. They could have had a minor. My opinion on the solution is tone back the scaling, or tone up the scaling, to where the more things you get, the stronger you become. Because you'll notice you hit like a wet fucking noodle on the bosses, even when you're kept up. I had all of the possible upgrades you could get when fighting the last boss, and I still hit like a wet noodle. It didn't really change that much. Yes, obviously, if I was level 1, it would have made a huge difference, but the fact of the matter is you still hit like a wet noodle even when you're fully upgraded. And that's just not a fun gameplay experience, where the scaling is too dramatic. On top of that, the bosses give you little to no opportunities to attack or heal, and it's just not a fun experience. It's just not. And then combine both of those things with the fact that you have to fight the camera, and you have 95% of the bosses, and I'm saying 95 because there's only a single one I can think of that isn't like this. 95% of the bosses are just annoying. They're not even fun. They're just a chore. I feel like I'm doing a task so I can just confidently say I didn't enjoy this as much as you did. And it creates a scenario where people almost can't see. It's annoying because with FromSoft games, you can't say I don't like the DLC or I don't like the game unless you've played it, because people are like, oh, well, did you beat it? It's like, well, even if they didn't, I feel like their opinion still matters. Nope, you have to beat the game. Oh, did you do it at level 150? Nope, you should have done it at level 1. Oh, you beat at level 1? Let me guess, you leveled up your weapon, didn't you? Oh, that doesn't count. Oh, you used a weapon? Why didn't you just use your fist? Oh, you used healing? What do you mean you healed? You can't get healed. You have to use nothing. You have to be naked, only using your fist, and never healing. On top of the fact, what do you mean your monitor's on? Why is your monitor on? What do you mean your monitor's on? You'd be able to see the game to beat it? That's absurd. Oh, what do you mean you had your headphones in? You have to hear and see the game to beat it? You can't have those things. That's absurd. That's way too easy. And it's this trickle-down effect of everyone saying your your opinion doesn't matter because you didn't do it at this challenge level. And it's my biggest issue with the community of Elden Ring and FromSoft as a whole. Voice crack, I know, embarrassing. It's my biggest issue with the community, not even the game, the community as a whole, is that a person can't have an opinion unless to the community. You can't have an opinion unless you're this master of all, god tier gamer who can play the game without even touching their controller, just using telepathy, beating the game with the monitor off, no sound, on a character that's level 1, only using their fist, and it never heals. It's like, that's the only way you can be proven that you're allowed to say something's bad in Elden Ring. Otherwise, you have to say it's good. And that's just not true. The DLC is mid at best. I hate to say. Is it worth your money? Honestly, no. If it's on sale, snag it. $20 or less, it's worth it. There's a lot of content and a lot of stuff to do there, but quantity does not mean quality. The quality of this is definitely low, and it's mostly due to the design where you're fighting the camera, the scaling is absurd, and the bosses give you very little time to do anything. All of these things combined together and make a very annoying scenario. Individually, these things aren't bad. If you were fighting a boss and the only annoyance was maybe they give you very little time to do damage, but the scaling's fine and you don't take a lot of damage, and the camera is fine. Okay, whatever, that's not a big deal. Oh, the camera's annoying, but you get opportunity to heal, okay, and you hit pretty hard. Okay, that's fine. And hey, look, there's a singular boss where this is the function. The only annoying part of the boss is just the camera. And that's my favorite boss in the entire one, and it's one of the later bosses. What do you go figure? They hit the nail on the head with a singular boss, but every other boss, they drop the ball. Because all the other bosses, you're fighting at least 2 of these things at once, and most of the time 3. And if the camera isn't an issue, their attacks do something that makes the camera the issue, right? If you're not fighting a giant thing that takes up your entire screen, well, you're still going to have camera issues because the boss is going to be fucking flying in the air 90% of the times anyways. So it doesn't matter. You're still having camera issues a lot of times. But the reality is you're going to have 2 out of these 3 issues most of the time throughout a boss fight, and potentially all 3 a lot of times. And it's just, like I said, it just does not create a fun experience. I cannot encourage you to play the game. But I will say this. If you absolutely loved Elden Ring and you love challenging yourself and you love trying to get better, then it is worth getting. I will mention that. If you like challenging yourself and being like, I want to get better. I have to get better. I want to prove to myself that I can do this. And it is a worthwhile DLC because it is going to challenge you, but it just doesn't challenge you in ways that I think are good, because it creates... A good way to put this is it's all the artificial difficulty in Elden Ring jumped into one. It's just artificial difficulty. There's no real difficulty on a lot of this stuff. It's just a lot of artificial difficulty, with the only real difficulty being the fact that you have to wait 10 minutes to do a singular action. Right, a singular offensive action. And it's like, okay, great. You have to wait 10 to 20 minutes. I can finally do a single offensive action. Bonk, I poked you for 650. You know what? If I was dual wielding great hammers, I probably would have broken your stance and I could have got a second hit in. Oh well, gotta go back to using any other weapon that isn't 2 giant fucking hammers. Whatever. Anyways, that's my take. I'm sure I'm gonna get downvoted, but it is what it is.